Hello and welcome. Today's a pretty exciting day. This is something I've been wanting to talk about for quite a while, or at least make a video about, because this is a lesson I've given a few times, and it's important information that I think that every developer going into the field should know regarding Git and GitHub. So maybe to start off, I'd like to clarify first and foremost that Git is not the same as GitHub. You could think of this as similar to email and Gmail. Not all emails go through Gmail, but Gmail is a very popular service, so sometimes people just assume that you're talking about Gmail when you might be using Hotmail or something like that. So Git, as I mentioned, is a file tracking system. It is addressing the problem of how do we have multiple developers working on the same large body of code. And initially, the way this was handled back in the day was that different members of a team would, quote, check out a file to work on. And when that was happening, no one else on the team could work on that file. Only the person who had it checked out could work on it. Then they could check it back in, and then other people could then update that file or modify it. However, our good friend Linus Torvalds, who invented the Linux kernel, had a different idea. His idea was, what if we could give each team member their own version of the code, and then whatever changes they make could then be pushed into the main body of code. And so that's sort of the initial ideation of Git. And he called it Git because he wanted something that was easy to type, and in British slang, Git is a term for a stupid person, and Git has the intention of helping you through your problems. So if, say for instance, you enter in a bad command, Git will oftentimes suggest, did you mean to type this instead? It's intended to kind of help solve its own problems in the vision of Linus Torvalds. So moving into this a little bit, let's kind of talk about when you might use Git. I like to think of the example of, I'm dating myself, but Super Mario Bros. 3. There was a game in the 90s called Super Mario Bros. 3, and there was a boss level on it that was very difficult to beat. However, right before that boss level was a level with lots of power-ups and extra lives and those types of things. And so what we would do is we would always save our game before the boss level at the level where things were good, and then that way, if we couldn't beat the boss, we could always go back to the point where things were good and retake it from there. And that's the logic that you want to use with Git. We save things all the time in programming. Every time we want to test a new change, we have to save it. But how do we save our game so that when it's at a good state, we could easily jump back to it? And that's another purpose of Git and GitHub. So let's see here. Let's take a look at the whiteboard here and talk about the actual process of Git and GitHub. And this may be a bit of an abbreviated lecture because this is a big topic, but the way I like to think about just working with Git is we have our machine, and within our machine, we may have many different files. And I'm going to draw some circles in here to kind of represent various files. That. And let's say that these are all files, and these could be any files on our machine. They could be letters that we're writing, they could be photos that we have, they could be our project that we would like to save. And we don't necessarily want to save everything on our computer for every project, like all those photos. So we only want to select a subset of files to track. And so when we do this, this is called a git add. And I'll use the dot because when we type this in terminal, we're going to see that the dot indicates kind of everything within this folder. So we're going to cd into the folder that we want to collect the files from, and then we'll use git add space dot. And once we do that, we will have collected our files. and we need to somehow stage them and say, okay, this is a point where our project is good, and this is where we want to save it. And so that's going to lead to a git commit. And another analogy that I like to use is thinking about it kind of like a warehouse. A warehouse has many items in it, but we're only ordering some of them at any given time. So if that's the case, this is going to be our warehouse that represents our computer. And this over here, where we collect all of our files, we could kind of think of as a loading dock. And so we're going to save the game at the loading dock, basically. So when we do this, we want to run git commit -m. Whenever you see a single flag followed by a letter, it is oftentimes an abbreviation for a longer command, so we could also write this out as message. And then we need to actually include the message. And generally you want something, if you're working with another team member, then you want to be able to describe to them what changes you made and where you are in the project. If you're just keeping this for your own reference, then you might just want to say what updates you made and note that it's in a good place. This isn't the best Git message, but this is just an example of a Git message. But the idea is still the same. We want our git commit, we want the -- message or -m, and then we want the actual message that we're using in quotes. And so at this point, we could kind of jump back to this state of our code at any given time. We could run a git log and find the ID number that we're looking for, and then rebuild our project when it was good. So just using that git commit. But the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to not just save it on our machine and with a git commit, we want to be able to save it up in GitHub. And so in order to do that, we will run a git push. And we could think of this as sort of like the delivery truck that then drives off into the night. So we have our delivery truck, and then we're going to run our git push. And then once we do that, we could push it up to the cloud. If we are working with a team, we might want to run something called a pull request, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but the way you want to think about that term is that you are not requesting that something be pulled into your code, you are requesting that they pull your code into theirs. And so that's where you get the term pull request. You're requesting that they pull it. You're not trying to push it into the project. You allow them to kind of review it and then determine if it's a good commit, if those changes will work with the rest of the project. And then at that point, they could perform a merge and approve that pull request. So this is the basic flow of it. And let me just write this down again in case anyone needs to, I don't know, remember this, take a screenshot. We'll do git add space dot, we'll do git commit -m, and then we'll do helpful message, and then we do git push. That was quite a bit of information. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Okay, good question. So if Git is the system, what is GitHub again? GitHub is the online website for managing these kind of local commits that we're making, these saved states that we're creating. And then when we push them up to GitHub, they're in the cloud. This could be exceptionally helpful if you have a crash on your computer and somehow lose everything. You now have a copy in the cloud that you could come back to and start back from whenever your last commit was. So it's another safety feature that you have for saving your code, whether it's on a team or when you're working individually. And okay, someone asked, why do we need to commit the code before we push it? Well, again, as I kind of mentioned, this is sort of where we save the game. So we can't just push bad code, we want to save it when it's in a good state and then push it up to GitHub so that that way, if we have to jump back, we don't have to re-debug whatever bugs we solved. Okay. All right, any other questions? Okay, and I do want to point out that these are all terminal commands right here, and you could go ahead and screenshot if you need that. But I will point out that these do exist inside of the source control inside of VS Code. So that's going to be this little icon right here that says source control when we hover over it. It's got 3 little circles with a couple lines going through it. And I'll dig more into this after we create an actual repo. So let's go ahead and maybe let's create a repo. I have a very simple way of doing this. It's kind of hacky, but it's worked for me, and it's generally what I teach people. Yes, of course, you can do this all manually through terminal commands, and we'll kind of see how to do that. Another thing I should point out about Git and GitHub is that this is kind of your developer portfolio, so it is important that you work on it and that you push code up to it if you're looking to demonstrate your skills as a developer. Each of these green little squares represents a day that I've been coding. Clearly, I've been off the last week or so, but I've had a lot to do. But let's go ahead and move into creating this repository. And so the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to click up on repositories right here and jump over there. And we can see that I have a number of repositories that I've worked on. I'm just going to click on the green new button. So again, I went up to just kind of my repo, and you could find it a couple different ways. But what you want to do is you want to find this repositories menu, whether it's under your icon or whether it's one of these menus up here. And once you get to this repositories page, you could click on this green new button. And we could go ahead and I'm just going to name it, I'm going to select the owner, which is me. I'm just going to call it test repo. It looks like that name is available. And I'm just going to leave all of this blank right here. I'll come back and fill all of this stuff in later. I'm a big proponent of having well built out readmes in very good looking repos because I think it does a lot to help people who are looking to, again, demonstrate their skills as a developer. So I'm going to go ahead and just skip all of this, and we'll do create repository, and this is just going to give me some very generic terminal code here. And this is all stuff that I could have put manually into it. I could have saved these commands or just memorized them and then built my repo this way, but I'm kind of lazy, so I want to just copy paste this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first create a project, and I think I'll just probably see what iCloud's doing here. Go into desktop, and I'm just going to do mkdir, and we'll call this test repo. A cd into my test repo. I'm going to open it. Oops, okay, or maybe not open it. See here. Go to my desktop and let's find that test repo. Let's open that now. All right, I'm dealing with some iCloud issues here, so. Let's go ahead and create a file inside of this. It doesn't need to be anything special. We could just do a test file. Create simple text file, and then we'll just put some text in here. We'll save it. And at this point, we could see on my terminal that pops up. We could see that there's nothing, really on this terminal. Command. It just says test repo. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come over and I'm going to copy this large block of text that says or create a new repository on the command line. And that's really why I went through that process of creating the repo, was just so that I could get to this block of code right here. And now all I need to do is copy it, jump back over to my terminal, paste it in, and then we could see that there's some Git activity being tracked now. It's listing the branch that I'm on, and maybe I'd have to do another video on branching here, but branching, pulling, cloning, all of those things. But let's just stick to building a repo and getting us up and running for right now. So we could see that I am now on the main branch. There is Git involved, and there's a way I could test this. I could type in ls, I'm on a Mac, so -la, and I should be able to see there is that .git file, and so this is a hidden file. I should also go into git ignores, but we may not have time for that, speaking of hidden files. But that's how we know that Git is on here. And let's go ahead and create a git ignore anyways. Let's just cover that real quick. We'll say .git ignore. And the git ignore file addresses the question, what do we do if we have files that we don't want tracked, but we want to keep them inside of our project? Like, say, for instance, we have what's called an environment variable. And this is simply another hidden file, and what it does is it tracks passwords and sensitive information, like, say, database connections, port numbers, things like that, things that you just don't want to be included in a repo that might be seen by the public. So let's just, for the sake of example, we'll say that, let's pretend I have a password. Then we'll say it equals ABC123, and then we'll save that in here. And notice that as I save these files, they're turning green. That's because they're being added to Git tracking. And so at this point, all of these files are being tracked. The git ignore, again, that determines which files we ignore. And so I'm going to add my .env file on here because I don't want it, my password being pushed up to the internet. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we should see what happens here. Notice that this went from green to kind of grayed out. That indicates that we are no longer tracking this password ABC123 or anything else inside of this .env file. It is now safe to push this code up to GitHub, and the password will be safe. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now, and let's just test this out, because we'll see when we jump over that if we actually click on this test repo and see what we actually created here, there's not really anything in here. There's not that text file. There's only that generic README file that doesn't have anything in it. It just says first commit. So what I need to do to make this work is I need to run through my commands again. I need to say, and again, these commands are available. You can see there's that little 2 right there. These commands are on here. If we click on these 3 dots, we could do, we should be able to commit all, and then we could run a push. So yeah, we have these commands up here, but I learned on the terminal, that's how I do it. So I'm just going to run through my commands. We'll do git add space dot. I'll do git commit -m, and then we'll say, what did we do? We added .txt file. Oh, and a git ignore. And .b file. Say ignored. And we have our message. It looks like our commit was okay. We created mode. If we want to test this, we could type in the command git status. And unfortunately, I don't have time to go over every git command today, but git status is a very useful one. But we could see your branch is ahead of origin main by 1 commit. That means I've made 1 save since that README file was created, because this is what, Git initially looked like, and now we have all of this other stuff on here that we could see in our file browser. So working tree clean, that means there have been no new changes since, I don't know, the last commit that I made. So we could go ahead and run git push now. And that will go ahead and push it up. And now if we jump over to our website and something, yeah, it worked. So it looks like we have our files. If for some reason something goes wrong during this initial setup, because I've kind of found that once the initial setup is clear, that it gets pretty easy to just kind of jump through it step by step. So once the initial setup is clear, then yeah, you're pretty much good to go. But if for some reason it doesn't work out, you could always jump into settings. You can delete the repository and start over again. I would not advise this if you've made multiple commits on a project. If that's the case, then it's worth your while to debug it and figure out what you need to do, if you need to run a git reset, whatever needs to happen. But if you're just setting up the repo and something goes wrong, don't panic. You could always just jump in, delete the repo, and then go through those steps that we went through to create the repo and push everything up to GitHub. So to close this out, I'd like to kind of talk about the benefits of Git and GitHub and why this is such an exciting lesson to me, because GitHub and Git in general really opens the doors not just to saving your work in an efficient manner, but it allows you access to open source code. This means you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you want to build something. For example, I have this website pulled up here called Clone Wars. And what this is just there are many sites out there like this one, but this is just a collection of various applications that people on the internet have built out and cloned. And they're in different languages. It doesn't matter what you work in. There's going to be something for you on GitHub. So with this example, we have we have a Netflix clone, we have a Twitter clone, we have WhatsApp, Discord, and if we go to any of these, we could see how it was built and all of the files that go into it. We've got a pretty nice description here. We could jump into any of these project files. Like if we want to go into the source code, we could go ahead and look at app.js and see what code they have. We could jump into different components and see what exactly they use to build this. These are all useful things that we could use to prevent reinventing the wheel. And so here's an example of one that I'm interested in because it's a customer relations management application, which is very common in large businesses. But we can see that we have 1,124 commits on this. It looks like people have been working on it for a while. It seems pretty comprehensive. And this would be a lot of work if I were going to build a CRM on my own. Even with the assistance of AI or vibe coding, this would be a very big project. So even if I'm using something like AI and vibe coding, it might actually be worth my while to start with something like a Salesforce clone as opposed to building all of this and maybe getting whatever bugs might come with AI. It's just an incredible useful tool that opens up doors to doing anything. And so unfortunately, I've gone well over my time at this point, but this is an exciting topic for me. I wish I had time to talk about more, and maybe I'll do another video and just kind of go into cloning, branching, a few more, medium advanced topics. But thank you so much. I hope this was helpful. I hope you go out and build great things using this information. And don't be afraid to make something new. Thank you.